Alright, you know what? I've meant to make this kind of video for a long time. I made it once, like 2 years ago, and then it didn't get as many views as I wanted, and I was like, oh, guess I'm never making that video again. And I'm sitting here in a position where I'm just counting down the days for the Pathfinder 2e remaster to come out, and I'm like, I don't care as much about views right now. You know what? Once I can remake all my class guides, re-update all of that, there's going to be a waterfall of content for me to make come October. And it's not going to stop coming with Player Core 2 and all that jazz. So I figure right now, especially as I'm recovering from my injury, which, hey, I'm recording this like 2 days after uploading my update. I'm rambling way too much here. I don't care that I'm rambling. You know what? That's what these videos are about. I'm uploading this like 2 days after my update video. I've made a lot of progress in the past 2 days. There's still like pressure, and when I really go for it, I feel it a little bit. If I twist too fast, it hurts. But otherwise, Rib is feeling great. I went to the grocery store twice today. So yeah, as long as I don't push it too hard, Rib seems to be just about back, which feels fantastic and allows me to record this video that I've wanted to make for a while. So what is this video? Well, this video is unscripted, system agnostic, pure, raw, no-nat rambling. I have basically the title of the video in mind. I sat down, I hit record, and now we're going. And so the subject that I want to talk about here today is what differentiates a good GM from a great GM. It's really easy to talk about what makes a good GM, you know, immersion, putting the players first, being prepared, etc., etc., etc. That all makes a good GM. But I think there's something else that separates them from being a great GM. You can have the perfectly prepared campaign. You can know your players inside and out. You can make sure they're having fun. You can be the best mechanics knowledge base in the world. That still won't make you a great GM. Now, obviously, this is going to be up for debate. What is most important to me might not be most important to you, but this is my video, so shut up. So let's dive right into it. I'm not going to make you wait until 9 minutes into the video like this is some clickbait YouTube trying to just steal your ad revenue. I want you to give me your ad revenue willingly. My number one thing that separates a good GM from a great GM is mistakes. Now, not avoiding mistakes. No. No matter who you are, we are all human. Or elf. Or dwarf. Gnome. Halfling. Goblin. We're not perfect. Even the best GMs in the world is going to make a mistake. That's why there's no such thing as a perfect GM. Aside from also not being perfect for everybody, because everyone has different tastes, thus making it a completely subjective title. That's not what we're talking about. Mistakes are going to happen. A good GM will take those mistakes, they'll happen, they'll laugh it off, it'll be awkward, and they'll just try to correct it. I think a great GM will roll with the mistakes, and in most cases, the players won't even realize a mistake was made. I want to start this off with an analogy. If you didn't know, then since a young age, I've done theater. I did theater through middle school, high school. I went to college for theater with a specialty in musical theater. I know you couldn't possibly ever tell in the world. I was a theater kid, wow. There is one thing that they drill into your head in theater college, especially. Like in middle school and high school, have you ever gone to one of these younger shows, you know, to support a child or a friend of a friend or anything like that? And there's sort of there's an air to it where if somebody messes up on stage, you can tell. They'll stammer or they'll restart the line again if the line is like, but soft, what light through window but soft. What light through yonder window break? Like, you see, they don't keep rolling. They jump back to the beginning. Now, that is an instant break for the audience. And that's why there's a huge difference where chances are, if you've gone to maybe even a professional show at a professional theater, not talking necessarily Broadway, but any local professional theater company, I guarantee you've seen shows where things have gone very wrong, but you were not able to tell. Because remember, you, the audience, do not know the play inside and out, and you do not know how the play was directed inside and out. How does this all apply to game masters running TTRPGs? Well, it's pretty much the exact same thing. If you, as the GM, make a mistake, whether that's in the story, in the mechanics, in the effects of a spell, anything like that, if you say, oh shoot, that spell should have raised your armor class by 2 more 3 rounds ago, I think a good GM might say, okay, let me think back, let's readjust all the stats, let's readjust all the numbers here and there and everywhere, and they might slow the game down, pause the game, and fix things, but they might fix a couple hit points or maybe turn a miss into a hit here or there. It's gonna take a while. That slows things down, people fall out of interest, it makes the initiative slow way down. But I think a great GM can take a mistake like that, realize it's happening, and play around it. In the idea of the armor class thing, like let's say the paladin used a spell to increase his armor class, but you as the GM didn't realize for 2 rounds, saying that, oh, he hits you, oh, he hits you. Well, unless you're outright showing the dice as a GM, this is a case where I would retroactively, I guess, say I fudged the dice and start doing it correctly going forward. Maybe one of those 2 rounds, I actually scored a hit on the paladin that should have missed. Well, maybe I turn a hit into a miss in a future round. It does not change the player's experience whatsoever. To their knowledge, everything you've been doing is exactly on point, but you just happen to forget that armor class bonus on one of your attacks. Well, give them a free miss down the line, and it all averages out. The place this gets really difficult, and I think is where the great GM truly shines, is in story mistakes. And I think this is a lot harder for something like a pre-written campaign, but this is something I practice constantly, because if you've seen any of my videos, you know I get things wrong. Not because I forget how they work, but because I just misread things and my brain is chaos. A lot of the times when I'm running a campaign, I will describe something wrong ahead of time that might come up later. Well, once I've described it that way, even once the words have left my mouth, like 3 seconds later, I realize, oh crap, that guy's supposed to be a goblin, not an orc. I guess he's a goblin now. I'll make it work. Why is the goblin the war chief of the orc camp? I don't know, let's write it into the story. That is what makes a great GM. A good GM might say, oh, sorry guys, he's actually not a goblin, I actually meant that he was an orc. But I really think a great GM, to keep the players invested, to keep the players' agency, honestly, you live with your mistakes as a GM. You don't let the players know their mistakes. Now, there's obviously examples of when you should acknowledge a mistake. If you super clearly describe something wrong, yeah, you can feel fine to fix it. Some mistakes you can't roll with. If the actor falls on the stage and breaks their leg, they're gonna call intermission, let's pause the show. There's only so much you can deal with. But there's a lot of mistakes, these little tiny mistakes that are gonna sneak through, that if you can catch them in time, you can write them into the story, you can work around them, and utilize those mistakes in a way that doesn't affect the player's experience. While yes, it might require a little more work on your end, it'll give your players a much more immersive feeling the less you have to correct yourself. Because again, imagine you're watching a play, someone gets halfway through a monologue, and they say, oh, shoot, no, it's what light through yonder daylight. Okay, let me start over. What's up? That would take you out of the scene immediately. And there's a lot of cases for this in tabletop role-playing games. Role-playing as a whole is a performance art. It's also a shared storytelling experience, and it's a game. It's a lot of different things. There's a lot of layers to TTRPGs, and to some people it might not matter as much. This is obviously going to matter more or less to different people depending on who you ask. Some people are pretty much immersion broken the whole time by choice, so they don't mind that kind of slowdown as long as the mechanics are perfect. Other people, like myself, really like to be invested in the scene, and the second that immersion breaks, it can be tough for me to get it back. The second I have a chance to zone out, my brain is gonna jump somewhere. And it's not necessarily by choice, it's just kind of who I am. I try to control it at the table, but it's kind of tough sometimes. But I think that's what makes the great GM so important, and such an important skill to learn, is to take these mistakes. Maybe you had a Goblin War Mage cast Scorching Ray, and it only hit one target for 2d8. Well, Scorching Ray technically does 3d6, but you did just describe it as a ray of fire. Maybe it wasn't Scorching Ray. Maybe the goblins have their own form of the magic. Sure, you got the mechanics wrong, but now the goblins have their own version of Scorching Ray. It's not the same spell. Maybe that one rolls 2d8. Maybe it's lower level. There's a lot of ways you can play with it, and unless your players are outright telling you that something is wrong, that's your chance to fix it secretly. You don't just erase it and start over from the beginning of the equation. You change the rest of the equation so the answer is the same. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense here with these theater, role-playing, and math analogies? So at the end of the day, as long as you don't acknowledge the mistake in the moment and you can fix it in a way that keeps the game rolling, keeps the end result the same as it would have been if you hadn't made the mistake, and your players can't tell, you're doing an A+ job as a great GM. Now, there's another theoretical exception here. What if the player calls you out on getting a mistake, especially mechanically, and they're right? Well, that's sort of the point where you do need to acknowledge it. You know, if your player is calling you out on the mistake, it's going to interrupt the flow anyway. There's nothing you can do as the GM to stop that. You can mitigate the interruption by just saying, yes, I'm sorry, we'll fix that going forward. And for some people that might be okay. But you will occasionally get the player who says, oh, well, my paladin actually had a +2 to armor class 2 rounds ago. That shouldn't have hit me. Can I get my hit points back? And again, it sounds weird, but the best way to handle this as a GM is just yes and. The same way you improv in character, the same way you improv a lot of stuff in role-playing, as a GM, the best way to make things settle is just say, okay, sure. You should be able to trust your players not to abuse your habit of saying yes to get things moving along. But yeah, at the end of the day, if the player says, oh, that shouldn't have hit me, can I get my 12 hit points back? For the sake of the game, I'm going to say, oh yeah, that's totally fine. My bad. Let's keep going. You know, you want to waste as little time as possible talking about the single individual mistakes and numbers here and there so you can keep the rest of the game flowing smoothly. And this is true whether you're a role player or a combat-focused table. Whether it's roleplay or mechanical numbers, if you're playing for mechanical numbers, you want to get to more numbers. You don't want to focus on a single itty-bitty number for too long. You want to correct it if you can. If it would be a bitch to correct, just skip over it and say, we'll do it right going forward. And for roleplay, it's even more clear. Like, you want to get to the next story beat. You don't want to focus on why that one goblin's arrow actually didn't hit you and instead was deflected because of your prayer of protection. I could list an infinite number of more examples of this, but it is what it is. When you as a GM make a mistake, handling it as unobtrusively as possible is what can make you go from a good GM to a great GM. Because mistakes will happen, but your players don't need to know they happened. That was smooth. That was a really good outro. High five me. Good job.